All right, I have a lot to talk about today, so this might be a long video, just giving you a warning to either settle in or save it for later if you don't have the time, or whatever, put it on 2x speed, I don't know. But I'm getting a lot of feedback and questions in relation to, as a diaspora, why do I think Ireland is in trouble? And why I would even care, which I think is an interesting question. But also I saw a live feed with the Scholar Gypsies the other day, and there was some interesting comments on there that Thomas Sheridan and John Waters made that I also would like to expand on. And also with the Conor McGregor interview with Tucker Carlson, I think that I'm so excited about that it's stimulating conversations, which I think is exactly what needs to happen. And I'll kind of expound on that as well. So settle in with me and just stick with me on where I'm going with this. So the first thing is, a lot of the things from my point of view, okay, this is my opinion, all right? So whatever, take it at that, okay? There is some science to back this up, which is why I'm talking about it from this perspective and is what I'm specializing in. So why I have maybe this view. Okay, so just putting that out there. But I notice that the Irish that I interact with from Ireland, meaning they were born and have grown up in Ireland, are very uncomfortable with the word trauma. Okay, so I noticed that the diaspora have less of an issue of grappling with that word. And in the Native communities that I'm associated with, they also have much less of a reaction to the word trauma. But for whatever reason, the Irish particularly are uncomfortable with that word. And so I want to spell out to you the symptoms of historical trauma or ancestral trauma to give you some understanding of what that really is, so that you can start to find less visceral negative reaction to what I mean by ancestral trauma. So I'm just going to look at my slide here so I can read them to you. So the adverse correlates of ancestral trauma, historical trauma, multi-generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, whatever you want to call it, okay, are unremitting grief, self-directed violence, depression or anxiety or both, body dysmorphia, internalized marginalization, alcoholism and substance use and abuse, sexual trauma, deep silence, cultural genocide, the loss of traditional values, desecration of land and institutions, leadership crisis, and a conspiracy of silence, and an overall attitude of secrecy. Okay, so I just want you to let those things sink in for a second. So when I talk about these things and I'm talking about ancestral trauma, those are the highlighted symptoms of it. And that includes what's going on with the Irish people. That includes what happens with the tribes here in North America and maybe probably South America too. And what the Aboriginal people in Australia also experience. And as I've talked about in other videos, maybe not as clearly as I want to, but we as Irish people are also a tribal society. We're a tribe. Okay, we're indigenous to Ireland. So we do have a very different way of being, okay, which is more in line with the tribal people here in North America think and behave, the way the tribal people in Australia think and behave, and we as Irish people are the same in that regard. Okay? So now, when you think in that way, okay, we're a tribe, we're an indigenous people that are going through as a collective ancestral trauma, multi-generational trauma, historical trauma. We also want to look at how far we've come, right? And so that next aspect of things is what creates flourishing, right? What creates that positivity that makes a community flourish. So when you look at that, then you start to recognize what are the pieces that are missing, okay? But you also start to recognize, why do people behave in a certain way as a community, as a tribe, that is not necessarily in the people's best interest, and start to focus on, these things that are just the noise in the background, rather than getting down to what is the truth at hand, right? So here's an interesting thing about human flourishing, and this comes from a study. And there were some aspects of the study that were refuted, that had to do with measurings of positivity. Okay, so we're not talking about that. We're just going to talk about the flourishing aspects. And there's 4 aspects of human flourishing. One is goodness, which is indexed by happiness, satisfaction, and superior functioning. Okay. The second is generativity, which is indexed by a broadened thought action repertoires and behavioral flexibility. The third is growth, which is indexed by gains in enduring personal and social resources, meaning that they're growing, the personal and social resources are growing. And the last is resilience, which is indexed by survival and growth in the aftermath of adversity. So all of those things are linked to positivity or growth in a positive direction, okay, a community flourishing. So when you look at it from that perspective, right, you can see 2 things that are very clearly moving in the right direction, or had been historically, for the Irish people, right? That's resilience. We got that down, right? We're a resilient people. There's no doubt about it. And growth. So obviously there are some larger personal and social resources that were available to us, however that was, whether that was the diaspora that left and found those resources somewhere else easier to attain, or whether that was because there was an influx of money into Ireland from outside sources, then that also was able to, help increase that aspect of flourishing. Okay. The ones that seem to be missing: happiness, satisfaction, superior functioning, right? And behavioral flexibility. So that behavioral flexibility comes from, and the lack of that comes from, those residual effects of ancestral trauma. So the interesting thing about ancestral trauma is that when you look at epigenetics, okay, which is basically how do the genes function or change as a response to whatever's going on in the environment, right? There are clear epigenetic changes that happen within a single generation of trauma. Okay, so meaning the mother and the father experienced trauma, The very next generation has epigenetic changes. So now put that under the microscope of 800 years of building into that, okay? And what ends up happening? There's physical ailments that are in relation to that. There's mental ailments that are in relation to that. There's susceptibilities to violence and experiencing violence, or addiction, or, depression, anxiety, that are all associated with that as well. So there's a lot that goes into this, okay? And so I want to be clear, that's why I'm speaking from this perspective. So now this brings me to the idea of Ireland, right? And it appears to me, so again, this is sort of the eagle view perspective, that Ireland is, like it or not, seen as like the redheaded stepchild of Europe. And what I find interesting, right, is that even in like hate comments that I've gotten on different things, there is this view that I see from Irish nationals that if they are not aligned with the EU, that means they have to be aligned with Britain. And that is also a part of that like traumatic thinking. Whereas who is really your biggest ally is America, and potentially Canada, I don't know, because there's quite a bit of diaspora in Canada as well. But I would definitely say America is your ally, because the majority of the diaspora are in the US. So it's a very interesting viewpoint that I see where Irish nationals get locked into this idea: if we're not with Europe, then we have to be with Britain, because we can't be sovereign ourselves. And that's a part of that traumatic thinking that you're not going to be okay on your own, and you're not going to be strong enough on your own, and you're not going to be able to survive on your own. And that's the aspect of it that I find troubling, is because I really don't believe that America is going to make you do it on your own, whether that is the American government that would be in support of Ireland, or the diaspora themselves, like making it a priority. One of those two things would definitely happen. So I think that there has to be a shift in thinking there. So then the next thing about, about being a redheaded stepchild, and how that trauma affects the whole Indigenous population's mentality, is this susceptibility to mistreatment. And that goes back to the epigenetics and that historical trauma, and what it ends up like putting and instilling within yourself that you don't even realize is there, right? And so what is another aspect of that is that deep silencing. And it's this idea to seek some sort of stability and safety, right? And so there gets to be this fear of speaking up, right? Is like, it's easier to get along than it is to speak up, even if that getting along leads to your own demise, right? So I did a video on disenfranchised grief, and also on idiot compassion, and this aspect, this deep silencing, which is a traumatic response, a communal, a tribal traumatic response, leads to this inability to recognize compassion, which is what our ancestors had, which is sometimes compassion requires action that can be harsh, right? An action that can be uncomfortable. But that discomfort is in the best interest of the true compassion and wise compassion of all. And idiot compassion is when the compassion is to make yourself feel better, even though it's not in the best interest of others. So that's not true compassion, right? And that trauma, that deep silencing that comes from that historical trauma ends up exacerbating those two aspects, right, of idiot compassion and disenfranchised grief. So that's where I think Ireland has gotten itself in trouble. And, that leads me to something that was on the live stream of the Scholar Gypsies that John Waters said, which was, I'm not sure that Ireland has truly gone through an actual freedom movement here. And this is where I have chills. And I have to agree with him. Because there is this mindset, right? Which is a traumatic mindset of the Indigenous people having fear of safety, of security, of the ability to grow, of the ability to be resilient enough in order to be truly independent and gaining that independence back. And I think part of that is because there has been such a fractionization of our people that it's extremely difficult to imagine that the diaspora all over the world and the Irish that are still in Ireland, who, as I've said before in other videos, I see as the caretakers of the land. Like, you are the caretakers of the land. And so, of course, we have to support you, right? Those are our ancestral lands. We have to support that. And so I think there's this fear that the Irish nationals are just all alone on this island, no pun intended, right? And that's just not true. It's not true. We're here to support you, and however we need to do that, whatever that means, right? And we're in the process of figuring out, what does that mean? And so that brings me to that last piece of someone like Conor McGregor, right? And why is someone like him, right, able to be the voice for Ireland? Someone that the Irish people themselves don't necessarily love, right? As far as his behavior as a basic human being, right? But to me, I look at him and I say, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to me. Number one, he kind of highlights in one single human all of the ugly of that ancestral trauma, right? Whatever he's accused of, whatever he's known for, it highlights all of those ugly truths of ancestral trauma in an epigenetic expression as a walking live human with consciousness, okay? But it also, in my experience, is that it always takes a controversial person to wake people up. That controversy is necessary because it creates a visceral reaction in people that makes them want to take action. And sometimes that discomfort, that ugliness, gets the energy moving, right? And gets the voice out and starts to air out that deep silencing. So when I look at him, I say, of course it's him, right? And being a professional athlete, I also am a professional athlete. As an athlete, you have to train yourself to overcome and just deal with the shit that gets thrown your way. And it doesn't make you want to shut down and be silent more, which I feel is part of why it has taken someone like Conor McGregor to shout out, "What is going on?" Right? Because it takes that training in resilience on that level in order to be able to do that and not want to hide, and because you're afraid of what your family's going to say about you, or your friends, or your neighbors, or whatever, because of your thoughts, right? So that's my 2 cents on my real 2 cents, right? On Conor McGregor and the position that he's in now. So when I look at the whole picture of Ireland, and quite literally saving Ireland, there needs to be awareness of what is broken within ourselves, right? And where we have the opportunity for growth. And sometimes that opportunity for growth is to look at the ugliness of what we've gone through as an example person, but also hear the words that are coming and resonating with that truth, because all of the whole picture is the truth. It's the truth. It's all of our experience being held in one being. And so if we can accept that about ourselves and get the voices moving, then a solution can be found. And knowing that your people, not just within the nation of Ireland, but globally, are waking up and coming together and wanting to help and wanting to stand with you, and whatever that looks like. So whether that is getting voice behind a person that is more palatable, maybe that is the answer. But maybe the answer is that all of that ugliness is exactly what is needed as a catalyst. So let me know your thoughts. I love to hear your thoughts on all of this, even if they're negative, which I get a lot of too. And be sure to like and follow for more. Bye for now.